Hi, I'm Todd Jones, host of the podcast Pressbox Access. Here's a clip from my interview with Alexander Wolff. Alex shares how a Sports Illustrated cover article on why Miami should drop college football produced blowback toward him. I want to get into a story about football, Alex. All these years of writing about basketball around the world, and if you Google your name, still this comes up. In 1995, for Sports Illustrated, you wrote an open letter to the University of Miami president, Edward T. Foote II. I think he was on the minnow for that tour. Edward T. Foote II. Anyway, you suggested, Sports Illustrated suggested that the University of Miami should shut down its football program. And it got a little bit of blowback for you from Dade County, Florida, didn't it? What was that like after that story ran?
Hurricane Nation was, Category 5. I don't know. So there's a backstory to it that I'm happy to share. Yeah,
sure.
I mean, this is where all the fun is. So we were in the middle of an editorial competition to see who would run the magazine. And there were two finalists, and we all called it in-house the bake-off, between one guy, Dan Okrent, who had been the editor at Life, and then kind of the in-house candidate, Bill Colson, who had come up, started like me as a researcher and become an editor. And Bill grew up in Coral Gables. And he was fascinated by all things having to do with college sports and kind of the balance between athletics and academics. And something hit the police blotter out of Coral Gables, and it was, number Z in a long line of things that Hurricane football players have been involved in. And he was looking for a cover story. And he had about, I want to say he had 2 months, maybe 3 months to kind of do his audition to run the magazine. And he buttonholed me in the hall and said, well, what do you think? You think they should drop football? I said, well, if they did, they could press the reset button. They could get the bad apples out if they need to. They could send a signal. Whatever. I said, well, think about that. Some story about how they ought to drop football. So another editor handed me a copy of this historical book about the University of Chicago and how their president, Robert Maynard Hutchins, had gotten rid of football in 1939. And
Chicago was a member of the Big Ten.
That's right. And it took another 5 or 6 years, but then they left the Big Ten.
Right.
But anyway, he never regretted the decision, and it, now of course people who go to U of C say it's where fun goes to die, but that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, so this editor hands me that book, and I have like 3 days to turn this story around. So I said, okay, how am I going to tell it? And I thought, well, maybe there's the old open letter, just appeal to this president who, I think he'd either been at Duke or he was a Duke grad, and say, there's a way you can pull this off, balance the two. Stanford does it, Duke does it, but right now, you're not doing it.
Yeah, let's set the scene. This is mid-'90s. The Miami Hurricanes are rolling. They're winning, but they're also in the news all the time.
It's kind of nuts. Yeah, it was kind of nuts. And so I'm reading this historical, it's maybe the old history major in me, but I'm reading this historical account of the University of Chicago and Robert Maynard Hutchins. And then I see this little mention that Edward T. Foote II, the president of the University of Miami, is married to the daughter of Robert Maynard Hutchins.
Oh.
So basically,
Chicago, all right.
All I have to do is conjure up the voice of this guy's father-in-law in my open letter to him.
Did you conjure up some harumph?
Well, I tried to avoid that. I mean, I didn't want to be a fuddy-duddy, but, as your father-in-law wisely saw when things got out of whack, and I made the argument that, it needn't be more than a pause, but just something that, could help you hit that reset button. And so anyway, they do the very stark cover, why the University of Miami should drop football, which got turned into T-shirts that were sold throughout South Florida that said why SI should drop dead. That was about 4 or 5 weeks later.
I like to have one of those. That's a good one.
Oh, I have one in my drawer.
Do you really?
It's a lot of fun. Oh yeah. But the real roller coaster ride for me was after the story comes out, and I did a number of TV interviews just trying to be a good sport. But some AM shock jock, a drive time radio guy in South Florida, got a hold of my home number. The perils of these sportswriter directories, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
And
he did his homework.
He did his homework, yes, exactly. And So he cold calls me at home while he's on the air. And I was smart at that point. I gotten enough nasty blowback that I was just letting the machine pick up. But of course, like an idiot, the greeting on my answering machine has been programmed to say, "Hi, you've reached area code blah, blah, blah." So all of South Florida is getting my home number.
Oh, no.
So it was days before the calls started to subside. But yeah, that's sort of the origin story, and then my experience writing the story. And then, of course, the coda is that Bill Colson's brother, Dean, Bill ends up winning the bake-off and becomes the SI editor. But his brother Dean is a trustee at the University of Miami and a regular tennis partner of President Foote. So, of course, I'm thinking, oh, Bill did this so they could have a spicy Thanksgiving meal when he goes back to see his family in Coral Gables. Anyway, that's the whole backstory.
Have you ever received an honorary degree from the U?
Never received an honorary degree from the U, but interestingly, I got a call out of the blue from a penitentiary from one Nevin Shapiro.
Speaking of the Hurricanes.
Yeah, the Miami booster of great notoriety, who, for whatever reason, thought I was going to be the guy to tell his story. And sure enough, I ended up finding him in a pen down in Louisiana and talked to him about some of his encounters. And maybe 15 years after that 95 story, did a story using Nevin as a way in. But yeah, it's kind of the story that hasn't died for me as much as it was really 3 days out of my life. I mean, I did a lot of work on it and I did a lot of thinking on it, and I don't regret anything about it, except that, there was a whole lot more in 36 years than those 3 days.
Yeah, and then every once in a while when things seem to die down, some idiot like me comes back and kicks the embers of the campfire, and now you're going to be getting calls from Dade County again.
No, it's a fun story to tell. I mean, I just want to tell all the parts of it, how I got the assignment. It's not like I had my hand up and say, "Hey, I want to make everybody in South Florida angry at me, so give me this story."
Yeah, you were more wanted in Dade County than Jim Morrison back in the day. So.